I'm Jim Collison, and live from the Gallup studios here in Omaha, Nebraska. This is Gallup's Called to Coach, recorded on September 4th, 2018. On this special edition of Called to Coach, we'll spend time investigating the experience, emotion, and empirical aspects of each element of Gallup's Q12 engagement instrument. And we want to know how to use it to increase the power of our coaching. If you have questions during this webcast, we do have a live chat room. It's available for you right below the main video window. Just peek down there. A couple of you already logged in. Bottom left-hand corner is login button. Choose the guest account. Put your name in where it says guest. Take those numbers out of there and check in with us. We will take your questions live during the program. If you're listening to the recorded version of this, you can send us an email. Super easy way to do that. And really, this is the best email address for all your questions, coaching@gallup.com. Don't forget to visit the Gallup Strengths Center. Just gallupstrengthscenter.com for all your CliftonStrengths coaches, resources, and training needs. You can also catch the video in both streaming and downloadable audio for offline listening. It's all on our coaches blog, coaching.gallup.com. Mike McDonald is our host today. He works as a senior workplace consultant here with Gallup on the riverfront with me. Always great to see you. Mike, welcome back to another Called to Coach.
Yeah, we're ready to go, Jim. We're heading into that higher order of engagement, right? We're starting to get into the rarefied air of what that looks like and feels like. So I can't wait to get into our conversation. This should have some, like you mentioned it earlier, this will have some sticky spots. I think this is going to stretch all of us. I'm really intrigued to just hear what our conversation today produces.
Yeah, I really agree with you on this one, because this is one of the first ones where it's not necessarily a manager or even the person. Mm-hmm. And it really, like you said, it really kind of transcends the idea of even team in a lot of ways. It transcends. And so let's not give away the ending. I don't even know it, so I couldn't give it away. But Mike, as we jump into this, talk about the question a little bit, and then let's talk about some of the resources we have available.
Yeah, absolutely. So today we are talking about question number 8 of our 12, and the exact phrasing of the statement is, the mission or purpose of my company makes me feel my job is important. And as we've done in so many of our previous conversations, I think it's really interesting to back this question out and then break it up a little bit and really press into what it is each of those words or the combinations of words really represents. Because, right, we know from the science, we know from the sophistication, the research, these words and statements are not accidentally created. They're not accidentally arranged, that there was a lot of rigor that produced these phrases and statements. And so I think it's interesting to really think about the mission qualified by or purpose of my company, one segment, but then the second segment, let's think about this, makes me feel my job is important. So Jim, I'm excited to really drill down into each of those specific sections and those two separated phrases within that statement to just see how do we actually lead to it? How do we make this statement real and come alive in a way that's actionable and felt on a daily basis where it needs to be in order for us to have true engagement?
Mike, we have some resources that we've been stating in the beginning of all these. And I think I'm going to say, if you haven't gotten out and gotten a copy of First Break All the Rules as a coach, I mean, we're going to say it every week. So you're just going to have to get past it. But again, it's one of those resources that's got some hidden gems in it, Mike. So let's just talk about the resources to kind of do what we've done every one of these.
Yeah, absolutely. To Jim's point, we'll touch on a lot of different resources, and we want to make sure that we remind you. And I think to Jim's point, if you want to really get the head start, and if you haven't caught up to where we're at already, get one of these things, if not more, right? Really add to your own expertise and your own ability to lead others through this perspective of engagement. The first one, as we referenced so many times, First Break All the Rules. Get the latest version. It's just a huge bestseller. Has become quite standard in the pantheon of management books, right? So when we think about what it has available to you inside, it's got a Strengths Finder code. It's got a Q12 code for teams up to 10. It's a great way to get a leader that you're coaching into the mind of what their capacity is for their leadership as it extends on through their team. And when you contrast and introduce engagement into that conversation based on the results of those 10 people who are able to participate in, it's an amazing conversation that you can be right at the center of, and that so many leaders desperately need. The other book and resource that we reference so many times is 12, The Elements of Great Managing. Some terrific terrific qualitative contribution to what we understand around the research of engagement, really brings each of the elements to life. Our chief workplace scientist, Dr. Jim Harder, literally traveled the world and has collected some amazing testimonies of some of the world's greatest leaders around each of the elements of well-being. And then, as always, we make sure that we introduce and integrate our own Gallup research and reporting, which are available to you free. You can download these things on our Gallup.com site. But we've got our State of the American Workplace report, our Millennial report, and our Reengineering Performance Management report. And those are all attempts, right, to make this as real and as applicable as you possibly can. So this will bring performance right into the hands of those people that you're coaching and who are really looking for the how-tos around what can I do to activate engagement. So great resources. Again, I know this is a great audience that has access and really uses those a lot. But we do like this outline, right? We do like building out, obviously, the combination of the empirical, making sure there's enough data, but not too much to overwhelm or capsize the attention of your audience. The emotional, we always want to get into the stories and those testimonies and those campfire stories, right, that get passed around within an organization that cause us to change our behavior. And in a large part of our conversation, as it always is, the experiential, that we can get ourselves inside of that item and remember when it was on, or conversely, when it was off for us, and what did that mean to our own performance? So we have that first person reference around that particular item. So Jim, that takes us up to where we're at as we dive into mission and purpose.
Yeah. Before we do, I'll just, we've got a section in the coaches blog, our resources tab. So go to coaching.gallup.com/resources, or just click on the resources tab. Mike, I recently updated the link on there to all the reports. This is a question I get a ton of, is how do I get to Gallup's research on fill in the blank, right? Whatever that happens to be. And so that reports tab there will now take you to a page that has every single report we've done. So you can get to any one of them, get access to them, figure out how to get them. Some are available in book form, some are downloadable PDFs, some are just blog posts that we have out there. But that is really a one-stop shop for reports. And it's going to be tough if you're going to work in this Q12 realm and you're not going to be aware of what's going on at the state of the American workplace, the state of the global workplace, or how millennials are feeling. Now I think you're going to run into some choppy waters. So that may be a site, once you find it, bookmark it. It's incredible. There's a lot of reading there. I'm not going to lie to you. Learners input, you'll love this site. But don't forget to take advantage of these. Again, it's a big question that I get. Bookmark that site, get it available. Coaching.gallup.com, click on the resources tab, go to the reports section. All right, Mike, as we dig in mission and purpose, what are we talking about here today?
Yeah. Well, the core to it, really, Jim, the psychological need or request that's within this item is for each of us asking, help me see my importance. Help me see my importance. And it's an interesting evolution, right? When we think about the hierarchy of engagement, we think about those first two items really being a combined request and a understanding about what do I get, right? What do I get from being part of this organization or part of this team? But then those next four items that we've gone through really are representative of a statement of, so I know what I get, but what is it that I give? It's still a performance, productivity oriented contribution of mindset, but there's an evolution, right? That when we receive something, then we're stabilized and confident that we can actually give something back in return. And our identity wants to ask those questions, and more importantly, wants the answers to those questions. But Jim, we're really operating now in this third tier of the hierarchy around engagement. And these four items, question 7, opinions, and 8 now with mission and purpose, will lead on into 9, commitment to quality, and 10, best friend at work. They really are organized around this mindset of how do I belong? And so I typically say in the transition from the previous 4 items, which is what do I get, to what do I give, actually more, what do I give as the preceding 4 questions. How do I belong then? Jim, I say this in that translation or that transition. What do I give? You might miss me not being here tomorrow because that means there's more work for you to do. Okay, but now we're operating around these 4 items, particularly essentially around help me see my importance. We're operating around this, how do I belong? Those deep implications of trust, volunteered discretionary effort that's much more relationally conveyed and given. And so now if I'm not here tomorrow, you're bummed out because, hey, we kind of hang out at lunchtime, right? We miss the banter back and forth, and it's part of our routine throughout the day. So yeah, you may or may not have to do more work tomorrow, but what you really miss is that relationship. And so you really start to see the forest for the trees in terms of how unique we all are, but what happens around those relationships. So when we're important, who better to create that importance than peers who are organized around a central mission, a central philosophy, a central agreed upon way that guides and governs why we do things and what we do universally across a team or across an organization when we're not around each other. So very, very deep emotional item in what it represents for each of us.
Mike, we've got some numbers, at least here in the United States, about how many in 10 feel. Can you talk a little bit about that? And then there's some direct correlation. You would kind of think mission and purpose wouldn't necessarily drive. This is a little bit of a surprise, I think, drive some outcomes like it does. Can you talk a little bit about those numbers?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So it actually, this item does fairly well relative to our other items. There's actually about 4 in 10, at least the United States, can strongly agree with this item. That's pretty good. In fact, I should know this, Jim, but I don't, but I think that might be the only one we have that's actually at 4. I might have to go back. My curiosity's got the best of me now, so I'll have to report back on that. But when we can agree with that, it has strong implications when we look at the higher performing teams versus low performing teams. To your point, Jim, interestingly enough, around profit. So obviously there is a value proposition to how unified we are around that central guiding philosophy that causes us to behave differently. And I think what happens is the relationships, right, inside that agreed upon approach has a deep sense of meaning for what individuals mean to each other. And it really unpacks and releases the best of their performance. And we see that in profit. Safety, I think, was interesting, but probably maybe a little more aligned with what we might expect. And Jim, it just makes sense. I think that if you and I have this connective agreed upon approach towards how we do work, that does mean something to our relationship. It's hard to organize ourselves around a mission or a purpose and not have a relational social proximity to each other that causes us just to be more watchful for each other, to be more mindful of where each other is at, whether that's errors or literally physical danger that's at stake. We have a peripheral awareness that's driven by that engagement that really causes us to watch out for each other if something's at risk. And then again, I think the third piece that I think is very interesting, but a little more explainable, turnover, right? That we want to stay at places where we are so captivated by that mission, that purpose, where we are captivated along with others around that mission and purpose. And that changes the meaningfulness of the workplace in a way that we continue to say yes and show up. So a powerful motivator in terms of how we extend our voluntary discretionary effort.
Mike, it's in some roles, some organizations, you think mission is easier to find than, you think like, okay, I work for a company that picks up trash, right? And yet it isn't every job, every company is in business for some kind of purpose. When we think about that, as people, how do we help those companies where they're not, they may not, when we think of high mission or high purpose, we might think about a company that's feeding starving people or right. That's changing. It's a Facebook where it's, they're literally touching 2.2 billion people with their product. And yet all the roles, all jobs have this potential, right? It's not just high flying Silicon Valley or, fill in the blank. This is, manufacturing needs to follow some of these. What as we think about diving into that idea, how do businesses need to approach this, especially from an executive level?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the overriding premise to all this, Jim, is we talk a lot about the transition and the evolution of the workplace, and as we talk about neoclassical motivators, such as a paycheck being the singular explanation of why you or I might work harder or say yes to a job versus no to a job. That explanation is not as simple, probably not as simple as it was ever given credit for, and it's certainly not that simple today. And we see a shift, an increasing shift in terms of purpose overriding the paycheck right, in the mindset of an associate or employee in the workplace. We also see a shift in terms of the work that I do being representative of my job. I'm doing this work because it's part of my job. And now there's a realignment or a call or a request around, I'm doing this work because it aligns with my life. And I think what we're seeing, Jim, is a continued validation of this particular item around mission and purpose. But the workplace is only continuing to become more transparent and more intense around its request that purpose and the relationship of our role to our life has to matter, has to be aligned. And we can do that. We can do that when we work through engagement. But it's interesting, and I love, Don Clifton had a quote that I think really captures the essence of this item really well. Don had a quote that essentially what he said was, there are no pass-through roles on your way to excellence. And we know that Don's real signature statement, as we think about engagement, we think about strengths, really he was studying excellence. And so when we reverse engineer out his statement that there are no pass-through roles on the way to excellence, it really does capture and shift our approach and how we should consider this item. And we see it bear out to your invitation originally in the question about what our results show us. So we do see that in roles like healthcare, some government entities, certainly education, we see some pretty strong connections to how this item naturally, I think, attracts certain people, but when it's aligned, how it really shows up well in those particular companies and organizations. We see some differences in how they are established in that regard, but it's still not a slam dunk. It's still not a slam dunk. So even in healthcare, like here's an example, Jim, 1/3 of hospital workers still give a low score to this element. So it's just not a slam dunk. Less than half the workers in any industry can say that they're connected at all, really, to their organization's mission. Conversely, though, and to your point, we see 25% of the workplace within retail or finance, chemical manufacturing, we see 25% of that group who strongly agree. So I think the point there is while there are some natural features to some jobs that make it a little bit easier to see what the mission and purpose is, there's no job or there's no employment, there's no role that's devoid of mission and purpose. And I think that's our conversation, right? Is how do we make that a reality and get rid of the rationalizations for why we can't and get more into the reality of how we can, because the center of our meaningfulness, our significance relies on it, and we've got to answer that question well.
Mike, I think when we think about retail, this is one of those areas where that can get really easy to go like, you know what, I come to work, it doesn't matter. This stuff sells itself, or it just doesn't, just doesn't translate. We see low engaged organizations, especially in retail, struggle with theft, right? Theft,
right.
Way up,
right.
Shrinkage, as they like to call it in the industry. And yet, to your point, you think about if there's no job that's unimportant, right? If they're all really important to the organization, how does somebody who folds shirts, puts them back after endless amount of customers, unfold them? I was just at our Kohl's last night buying some new clothes, and there was a gal folding, and I went to the clearance racks, and they were just destroyed from a day of shopping, right?
Right.
How does one find, how do we find mission? How do we find purpose in folding shirts or cleaning up the clearance rack?
Mm-hmm. I think, so one of the things I love about this item, Jim, as we think about mission and purpose, and really with engagement in and of itself, I think it makes us more emotionally intelligent. And when we're engaged and we're mindful about delivering on some of the emotional aspects and elements of our work, it causes us to shift and evolve ourselves. And it really transforms what could be previously considered menial, quote unquote, tasks, right? So now I can fold shirts. Yes, that's fine. That's functional. Or I can create a great first impression, high class, high touch first impression for a potential new customer, right? And so if I walk in and it's just a haystack full of unfolded shirts and it's a complete mess and chaos, that's a signature statement. That's my first impression of that store and that group. And the likelihood that I'm going to have any trust or any attraction to even start to look on the other side of that experience to really see if that's representative or not is very, very unlikely. However, if it's a pristine, perfect crisp, clean presentation that's represented by a stack of neatly folded and organized shirts that were folded as quickly as people were trying them on. Boy, that's a signature statement as well. And so it really sends a shockwave of cultural, I think, respect and priority and statement to a potential customer that, yes, while I'm sure I'm a nuisance to that retail person for the 14 shirts that I try on and the hundreds of pins that I take out to try them on and make sure that one is right, and they pleasantly take that mess back from me as I leave the change and fitting room and fold them all back up neatly and do it all over again for that next potential buyer. Boy, I don't know, Jim. I don't know how representative that was of your trip back to Kohl's, but that's a statement. If that person can really deliver on that in a way that transcends and means something to me, I think I can trust them with lots of other real estate, or not real estate, but opportunities to spend, right? And so real, what would I say? Yeah, just real opportunities, not real profit increases, not just a mirage of math, but real profit increases demonstrated by that emotional connection to my desire to spend. So very interesting in that experience, and I think one not to be taken lightly or missed. And we have to activate that, right? As leaders, we have to connect that folded shirt to that first impression.
A question from David in the chat room, and I'll kind of tie these together. How important is, when we think about the leadership and managers, setting the pace and the tone, and then what's the responsibility of the employees themselves owning this to put together this vision? You know, back to the Kohl's conversation. By the way, Kohl's is not, I don't know if they're a customer or not, and we're not bringing them up to advertising them, but I just happened to be there yesterday buying a shirt, which I got a really good deal on, by the way. But Mike, can you talk about the different roles? And then I'm going to ask you a question about onboarding that Todd asked here in a second, but talk about those two roles of management and employees, and kind of how do we come to this mission and purpose?
Yeah, no, that is a great question. I think there is one of the things that we do notice. There is, we've talked about this a little bit, but this item is representative of that true cascade effect of engagement. This has a direct tie-in to senior leadership. Senior leadership modeling it, representing it, talking about mission and purpose in all the right ways. If mission and purpose is an event, if it's something that's spoken to or about once or twice a year, that will not cut it. And so there has to be an active, living, breathing expression that's really symbolized by senior leadership in what it looks like, feels like, and sounds like. And so we do see an accountability around senior leadership to model and cascade that out to the managers, right, that work for those senior leaders, that middle management population. And likewise, they need to model and cascade that on out to their teams. So if we were to think about a strategy, we do have to start and make sure that senior leaders are doing that well. And we see a lot of really great effect. I've worked with a lot of clients, and they are not accidental about how they use town halls or forums or their own weekly or monthly cadence of communication and recognition. They make sure that whatever living, breathing examples that they can highlight or recognize are not casual or accidental in how they're positioned. And I think that's a necessary statement, because it's one of the challenges of this item, right? There can be a delay, there can be a gap if we aren't really active around it. So we see the best of these senior leaders and the managers of teams below them who really work through and model that for their own frontline teams.
I think, let me just say, I think sometimes, you talk about that modeling to continue, just use this example for a second of a manager walking by one of those kinds of situations where the shirts are out of alignment, and not making sure it's taken care of right then, or taking care of it him or herself, and saying, you know what, I'm seeing something out of order. I mean, when you talk about a culture of excellence, that is, I think sometimes that is lost when the leadership expects that of everybody else, but doesn't do that themselves when they walk by the piece of trash in the parking lot, when they themselves don't see the quality that they're looking for, the purpose that they're looking for, in this case, excellent customer service, and they pass it by, but expect others, to do the same. And so we get, Mike, talk a little bit about, I want to get to this onboarding question too. What's the responsibility when we talk about onboarding, and really at the heart of this question, what's the responsibility in the onboarding process to make sure this, this mission is portrayed to the customer, is taught? How does that work?
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, I think we need to make sure that the ingredients that we have in our approach towards this item are appropriately measured out. And money, I talked about this earlier, Jim, but I think there is a huge statement, even in our onboarding, maybe preceding onboarding, even to our talent attraction strategy. One of the really great examples that I enjoyed, and I think you all will get a lot out of it if you dig into it and read through it. 12, The Elements of Great Management book, talks about a great case study with Cabela's. And even in their talent attraction strategy, they really have an appeal around mission that is at least equal to or more so than what they're putting out there regarding the income potential. And so there's a lot of qualitative statements in their approach that really talks about how they want that really active and involved hunter who's just irrational and passionate about hunting or about fishing or about all of the activities that are associated with the products that they're going to sell at that store. And there's even a statement there about from a manager who's like, look, I don't even worry about, their ability to handle our technology or some of our approach towards how to use a register or some of the skills and knowledge pieces. I want people who are really passionate about the work that we do. First and foremost, as a screener, these other things are almost seemingly incidental, right? They're almost a little bit discretionary in terms of how well they do that. And it was just a great statement, because what you saw was in this story that they talk about, when they go to open up a store, these folks don't necessarily know how to really activate what it takes to put on a storefront and to get a floor ready for sales and presentation, et cetera. But what they don't miss on is that emotional appeal. And when they can tell their own stories, so now we've got a culture coming to life around mission and purpose and passion that comes around a result, boy, that connects deeply and personally with people. And so, Jim, it doesn't matter to you and I if we have to wait in line a little bit extra long because maybe somebody doesn't exactly know how to run the cash register because they just shared with us or made a great connection about where they just went fishing this weekend. And you and I love to fish. Side note, we don't. But if we did, we'd be caught up in that story, and that it would go on and on and on, and there'd be a relationship there and literally an imprint, Jim, that we would be left in our brain about how pleasurable it feels just to walk into Cabela's because we relive that moment with that person. And so that's where it matters so much. And so when we think about our onboarding, we just have to make sure that we are tying into that core that we all have. And one of the data points that I think is really important that universally represents all of us, Jim, we asked a question a while ago to a randomly selected population. And the question was essentially, how important to you is the belief that your life is meaningful or has a purpose? How important to you is the belief that your life is meaningful or has a purpose? 83% said very important. So think about that, Jim. I'm not sure how many questions we've asked that rang the bell at that top level. 83% said very important. 15% said fairly important. So we've got 98% who answered one of those top two line items on the scale. And so it's a deep fundamental need. And if we can tap into that in onboarding and in our talent attraction strategy, that cultural expectation just shifts and is shaping who we are from the second that person arrives. Jim, I know you have a lot of experience around that, even with your own internship group, right? How do you activate the core of what's represented in that opportunity with a group of high school and college students in a way that really causes them to rally around that?
Yeah, we find sometimes too that talent is locked up in individuals that we don't even see it right away. Oftentimes, the assessment finds it first, the interest follows, which is kind of an incredible process. We have our interns go through the same onboarding or same talent, talent processes we have our full-timers do now. But I see this from time to time. They're ready. They just don't know they're ready. And they need to be given some, they just need to be given some time. I think that's part of the onboarding process as we think about selecting the right employees first, right? That needs to be that selection, that talent process needs to be done very, very carefully. And then letting them grow into these let them grow into these roles. I'll just leave it right there.
Mhm.
It's just super important to think how important that is. Where do we miss often though? Where do we see where those opportunities miss?
Yeah. Well, I think there's so much equity sensitivity. We're getting. I think equity sensitivity is a representative theme for these 4 items that we're in the middle of, Jim. When we talk about how do we belong, because you think about that. If even if we did, and here's an exercise that, if you want to make a statement, you can do this. I've actually stopped doing it. I used to get into some of these senior leadership meetings, and to prove a point, I would ask them to write down their company's mission statement on a folded piece of paper and then just hold on to it. So I was trying to make a point. Do they even know, right, what it is? And then if they did, was their attempt aligned with the attempts of the rest? And so it ended up being a little bit uncomfortable, but I think I got the point across, and so I still do it sometimes. But my point to that, Jim, we're missing the opportunity is if we are that flimsy, or if we're that casual about what it really represents, it's actually working against us. It's become something that people make fun of, right? It's a funny token statement or gesture that hangs on a wall that has no credibility whatsoever. And quite frankly, as leaders and as an organization, we lose credibility for even having it up at all. And so if we're not intentional about how we reference it, if we're not intentional about how it guides and governs the decisions that we make and the why around those decisions with credibility, then we're better off really not having it up at all. And what it's missing there, if you think about that when you talk, Jim, about attracting talent, how the selection process really takes care of that. When you think about the stars, think about your star power that you have within your organization. And those stars are tapping into that deep emotional reservoir that really propels them to a performance that's just different. It's just different. And there's 3 groups that really represent when we're doing this right and when we're doing it wrong. And if we think about it, the first of these groups, where they're just not as engaged around this item, their work is just simply a job, right? They're punching the clock. It's a necessary inconvenience. They have to have money, and this is the quickest, shortest route for them to generate money and income. And that's pretty much the signature statement represented by that group. The second group, though, they'll expand beyond that, and they'll see their work as a career. So there's a stretch now to that. There is a horizon, and there's some pay that comes along with that. There's prestige and there's status, but it's still a give and take relationship. I'll give as much as I think I can get back in return. And so still somewhat of a transactional exchange that takes place there. Not terrible, but nothing magnificent or special that's really going to move an organization forward. This third group, and this is where I think if we think about the population represented behind this item, as hard as it may be to deliver on and activate, this third group literally sees their work as a calling. So, Jim, even when you go back to somebody folding shirts at a retail store, that can be a calling if it's aligned with the right reasons behind it or around it in a way that it connects and makes a difference to that customer. And that can transcend any role, or we can be shoveling coal, taking out trash, or performing heart surgery. If we can connect that calling, that sense of calling, which, as you mentioned, really does have to align with talent. If we want to align it and combine it with other elements of engagement, think if we align mission and purpose with opportunity to do what I do best, boy, we've got a power source there that's going to be tremendous. Think if we can align mission and purpose with opinions count, right? So now you've got buy-in from me as I get to shape and contribute or interpret that mission and purpose individually and contribute to it individually in a way that makes sense to me. Again, these are deep emotional motivators that separate. And so those people who see their work as a calling, they associate their work with, it's a belief statement, it's a value statement, that they're actually contributing to the greater good. They're literally making the world a better place. And they don't concede on it. They don't compromise. They don't qualify that statement. They make no concessions whatsoever around it. And so there's great statements, even in even 12, the elements of great managing book. There is it's an ice cream brand, and their statement is, we believe in ice cream. It's just as simple as that. We believe in ice cream. But the spirit underneath that statement is, hey, let's enjoy something today, and let's enjoy something together around this today. And it's okay if something tastes good. And it's okay if every once in a while there was a reward around some hard work, and that's a shared experience. And so they didn't make fun of themselves for believing in ice cream. They actually lifted it up to this, again, transcendent kind of statement where they shifted their behavior. It meant something to them. And if that rings your bell, if that means something to you, you should probably consider working at a place that believes in ice cream. If you can't quite connect yourself to that, if you can't really buy in and believe in that, you're going to be in a really weird place for yourself, right? You need to keep looking until you can find that alignment around that true calling. So, so Jim, jump in. What are you thinking about there?
That first, I am thinking about ice cream. That'd be super good right now.
I believe in ice cream. I do believe in that.
The other night, I needed some steps, and so I said, "You want to walk down to Dairy Queen with me?" To my daughter, she's like, "Yes." She never says no to ice cream. So you get steps and ice cream at the same time. Mike, the danger of that, there's a fourth group in this. That's the actively disengaged, who are very dangerous to your organization. But I almost want to say the least engaged, when we think about it's simply a job. They can actually be more dangerous than the actively disengaged, because they're taking a seat from someone who could be actively engaged. At least with your actively disengaged folks, you kind of know it. Come on, managers. You're actively disengaged folks, and you should be doing something to help them find a place where they can be engaged, right? That's kind of the key. If it's not here, let's find a place for you to make that happen. But the folks who are in that first group, who they may not be telling you that. In fact, they may stay around for a really long time. Mm-hmm. And they're not doing the extra. They're not doing they're struggling to provide the culture and the mission and the purpose, but they're still there. It's really, really a difficult group. And I think as managers, as leaders, it's one we need to pay a little more attention to than just, well, at least they come in the morning. Yeah. You want to add anything to that?
Well, it's funny you say that, because I say, a lot of times I'll ask people, this won't translate that. If you're watching, this will translate. But I'll ask people, hey, raise your hand. Okay. So they'll raise it up to about right here. And then I'll say, can you raise your hand higher? And they'll raise it up higher, right? And the point we always talk about is that space between the first attempt and the second attempt is that voluntary discretionary choice where we're actually engaged. So Jim, what you're connecting with me, at least what I'm responding to as you say this, is like right here. Yeah, that's fine. That first attempt, it's about shoulder high. You can't fire me, right? It's just enough, but there's nothing significant about having my hand raised shoulder high, right? There's nothing that's moving us forward. So I'm occupying that chair. I'm consuming oxygen in the building. But beyond that, it's going to be a pretty rare day that I actually raise my hand up or do anything that's going to cause anybody to take notice or move our organization forward. So I think you're exactly right. And then think about it, Jim. So me walking around with my hand about shoulder high kind of normalizes that for everybody else. Well, why would they extend themselves anymore? If I can get away with it and not be fired, if that's my outcome, I can influence everybody that way.
Yeah. So Mike, we've talked a lot about what it could be. What do the best do? When we look at this, what are some things we've seen and some advice we'd give on what the best do?
Yeah, I think one thing I'd really have us think about, if we pull the lens out around this particular item, one of my favorite topics that we at Gallup talk about a lot is this notion of an organizational identity. And if you think about the identity of an organization, it's really represented by three different components. The first and foundationally is the purpose, right? And we're talking about that today. What is the purpose of that organization? So in essence, how do we live and how do we accomplish work around here, right? What is represented behind that purpose in those questions? But then what we're talking about now is the culture, right? And so if we have a purpose that this organization stands for, what's the culture that supports that? And that's really where we're talking about engagement. How do we have a culture that takes that purpose and brings it to life for us internally in a way that's real, it's emotional, it's relational, in ways that causes us to extend ourselves far beyond what would get us, or what we need to do to keep ourselves gainfully employed. And that third piece that needs to be aligned then, and if we do the first two right, is the external brand. The external brand then is aligned, and it's just simply, how are we known? And so the pressure point is around our culture of engagement, connecting purpose to brand, so that if somebody walked in, Jim, to that store, would their first impression, that brand impression, be aligned with the purpose of whatever that store stands for? And if we do it right, our culture makes a connection between that purpose and brand. So that's a best practice, but it's a conversation that, and it's an alignment that can easily get missed. And it's a good call out for a lot of senior leadership groups is, first off, could people even start to say or identify what the purpose is? Are we bringing that to life through our culture? And if we were to ask our customers what our purpose is, could they tell what our purpose is based on the brand that we represent in our service and delivery on the other side? So first and foremost, that alignment and that conversation has to be right. One of the things that I think is really missed when we think about question 8, mission and purpose, is a disconnect between that and question 1, I know it's expected of me at work. And you can see the disconnect between both of those two that can happen. On the one hand, we can have a really strong level of expectation, but the inability to connect that to the higher order thinking, or what does this really mean if I go through these tasks today, if I fold these shirts today, does it make a difference to our overall mission as an organization? And if it does, is anybody helping me connect that? But if nobody is, I don't roll up and I don't find myself being very significant or important in advancing the culture and the customer facing climate of our organization in a way that takes us into sustainability. Or the other can happen too, where I've been in a lot of workplaces where they had this incredibly strong attachment to mission and purpose. And you almost see it act as a screener, Jim, to some of our earlier points, where people who are part of healthcare organizations or educational or academic environments, it's the attraction to that brand that causes them to say yes, and to take a job with that organization. But then the disconnect happens when they don't see how anything they do today really ties and connects to that mission, to that spirit, to that purpose and philosophy. And so their work becomes disjointed and disconnected then, because they don't have it. There's nothing that's made sense out of it to feel that connection on a daily basis. And so our best practice is really when we see team leaders, what they're doing through a variety of different ways, they're very active in making that connection. That first and foremost, and Jim, you've talked about it more than anybody in our previous conversations, but an individual development plan. That individual development plan ought to be very active in making sure that there's a point of reference around the company's mission and purpose, and how did the goals and the developmental plan of that individual, how do they connect the organization's mission and purpose to what that person does and is expected to do in a way where both are growing along together as a result. Strengths and coaching around strengths is a fantastic tie-in to really drive mission and purpose. Don Clifton has his great quote, right, about strengths develop best in the framework of mission. And when you start to captivate my strengths and bind them together and coach me in a way that's meaningful and important to me, well, you've given me some levers to pull where now with and through excellence, I can roll up and deliver on a mission. I'm part of a mission that gives me a practice around using those strengths. And those two tie in together, right? Where I'm reinforcing and delivering on a mission, learning more about my strengths, which gets me excited, which wants me to be involved in that cause even more so. And we can really get ourselves into a really nice self-propelling cycle of mission and purpose and strengths all reinforcing and reinvesting in each other.
Yeah, I love that individual development plan. Actually, that's the form I use to teach strengths. Yeah. Because I think goal setting, and actually you taught me something new here, Mike. I may try this, but goal setting in the context of mission is really, really important. Seeing how they can tie their themes, which talk about individual talents, and then claim those talents and point them in a productive way towards a specific goal. In other words, how will I contribute, right? So if we've got this mission that we're talking about, and I'm coming in new and I'm onboarding, or I've been there a while, I continually need to think, how can I use those talents that I have that are unique to the organization? How can I really point them towards our mission in a way that makes us all win, right? Mm-hmm. And that seems super intuitive, and it's totally not. Like everybody struggles with this. I think it's one of those exercises you need to do, even though you think you know. Like, even though you think you know this, like, oh yeah, this is pretty easy. I'm using this, this, and this. But to sit down with your top 5, your insight report, underline those things you agree, cross out the things you don't, circle the meaningful words, translate them into that IDP, and work through a goal is so insightful, not just alone, but in the context of other, in the context of other employees, or I take college teams through this. exercise when I do it that way. Mike, this would be an excellent, I haven't taken it all the way to mission and purpose. We sometimes go as far as the goal being, I'll be a good teammate, or I will help this team succeed no matter what. Sometimes that's the goal we start with. And then how are you going to be a good teammate? You back yourself up the form and work your way down. I love the idea of pointing that goal is what's the mission or purpose of the organization, and how do I help fulfill that?
Yeah. Yeah, Jim, we were taking a play out of that book. We with my team this round of our most recent Q12 action planning and feedback, it's if you think about our state of the team conversation, which is a template for how you do action planning, really effective action planning around your most recent engagements and the goals and the outcomes that you as a team really want to own and collectively drive. We're actually adding another layer to that, where we are using our own mission and purpose, our activated values at Gallup, and we're making sure that one or more of our activated values are specifically and intentionally tied to our action plans. And so just so we make sure that we're always tethered to what does it actually mean to our organization? How does this really reinforce a value that we all agree upon? And I think I'm excited to see the results on the other side of that, because I think it's going to matter. I think it's going to be a meaningful edge, and we're not doing poorly. We're doing quite well, but I think this is going to have a level of significance to it that I have not introduced into the conversation. So I'm really excited to see what that extra ingredient does. We talk about mission and purpose, but not as an intentional part of our Q12 action planning. So I'm really curious to see what that does for us. The conversations around the feedback have been really robust, and I think involved as a result of that.
I know we say this. I know we say this in everyone. Like this is a really important question that's foundational in the sense of, if you miss this one, and I know we've said this on all of them, but if you miss this idea, if you don't get culture in your organization, there's going to be lots of other areas that are going to suffer.
Yeah. And
you won't know they're suffering because you're not measuring them.
Yeah.
And so, this is an area where if people are coming to work and they're missing, like, why are we here?
Yeah.
What are we, what is it you say you do here? If we're asking those kinds of questions, man, getting some of the earlier questions to work the way you want them to can be rather difficult. And Mike, I hear this all the time. How do we build a strengths-based culture? And that question kind of gets to the heart of what we're talking about here in Q8, as far as, how am I building mission in? And I don't think there's a better or easier way to start with strengths as we think about what the culture is doing and measure it with engagement, right? You have a great 1-2 punch there, but I just can't emphasize enough the organizations. How do you develop a strengths-based culture? I think you have to start with this question in mind.
Yeah.
Don't you think?
I do. In fact, a couple of ways that I think that there's, we have to really look for opportunities to really bring mission into a normalized point of reference for our daily work experience. It's funny, Jim, as you were talking, I almost wonder, when we think about the pitfalls and the trapdoors around recognition, right? How if there's a delay in recognition, then it works against us to the degree where if we do offer it, then we feel really self-conscious because we know that our frequency around giving it isn't often enough. And then so that causes us maybe not to give any at all. And I think there can be the same kind of psychology or barrier towards even mission, where if we don't talk about it often enough, then we feel kind of self-conscious or maybe fake or false when we do. And so it almost makes me wonder, maybe we should adopt a mindset about the mission or purpose of my company makes me feel my job is important every 7 days, just like with the recognition item, that if we've gone a week with an individual or with our team not having referenced something that happened performance-wise, either for our organization overall or our team or an individual, and staking that back down to something about our mission and purpose, we're probably missing the mark of normalization. I was even thinking about, you brought up the point of measurement. We all love scorecards, right? We have all sorts of feedback sheets and metrics and dashboards that organizations run their companies by or teams measure their success by. But could we look at every single field that's populated by a metric and tie it back to a missional statement that represents who our organization is and its philosophy and its culture and its approach? I don't know if I could say yes to that every time, but I'll bet if we could, I'd like to see what happens on the other side. I think there'd be some some frontiers there for us to explore if we did that well and did that right.
I think we also sometimes shy away from the money metrics on the mission questions. And I think those two have to be intertwined. If your organization's not profitable, it won't last very long, right?
Right.
Some of the best run nonprofits I have seen are the ones that use profit methods to run their organization. In other words, they're holding to budgets strictly. They're actually doing budget planning. They have high mission, not with just their employees, but with their donors, right? With those people. Man, if a nonprofit could turn this mission and purpose question and work it towards their donors, their constituents, whatever you want to call it, and help them, if they understand their mission and purpose, they're more profitable. And I know for some people that's blasphemy, because you're like, are you talking about profitable financial giving? Yes. Like it still has to happen. And some of the best nonprofits I've seen really take that business-like approach to it and understand their mission, right? If we're going to do more of what we're going to do, money's just not going to appear. Yeah. It has to be profitable. We interviewed the folks at Compassion a year or so ago. And wow, do they have some they work really, really hard at their donors understanding their mission and their purpose and exactly what they're doing, right? And they don't take we're a nonprofit approach, we don't have any money. They are really trying to get out ahead of that and say, how do we continue to develop those funds needed to do the jobs that we're going to do? By the way, child hunger, not going away anytime soon. Yeah. So we need to figure this thing out. That's, by the way, if you're wondering, that's in the Called to Coach channel. Just go over to coaching.gallup.com and search for Compassion International. Really, really good interview. But even in those spaces, Mike, where you would think mission and purpose wouldn't matter, or maybe it does more, and you would think, oh, they've got this because they're a nonprofit. Right. I don't think it's a gimme. I think you got to work at this.
Right. No, I think you're exactly right. Think about the best stories, the most compelling stories that cause us to give. It's to those organizations that can really get us wrapped up in the emotion and the passion and the spirit of the work that they actually do. And yet it's funny, Jim, to your point, I think a lot of times either some of those organizations don't press into that as much as they probably could, or we don't see exactly what's going on in the way that value should be represented. But the money and the mission can be extremely synonymous in terms of the value statement that's represented there, right? So the money is just another indicator of how important that effort actually is, how significant that shared purpose and mission actually is. And are we effective in really telling that story? Are we effective in really elevating that mission and purpose so that other people can see it? Child hunger should not be ignored. It should not be an optional cause that people get caught up in. And if we start to rationalize it or qualify it, then we dilute the intensity. And quite frankly, everybody loses, because we want to be captured by that cause, right? We want to be part of an effort that matters to the world and to ourselves. We see that in the psychology of the question and some of the research around it. So if people back off, if those organizations back off of that statement and start to apologize for it or qualify it, then they're compromised, and so are we as a result. So I love it when organizations like that really lead. It's significance. It's not ego. It's impact, right? It's not ego, and I think we all admire those organizations because they can do that with authenticity and credibility.
Now, there's a lot to it pretty well. Mike, we have about 3 minutes left.
Yeah.
Final thoughts as we kind of bring this in for a landing?
Yeah, a couple points that I really did want to use to put a bow on this, and these, we've talked about these, but I just kind of want to synthesize and summarize exactly what it is that we've talked about today. And as we move into best practices, as you work with team leaders who are really trying to make the connection between mission and purpose and the daily experience around that for each one of their team members, there's just 3 points that I think we can grab onto. First and foremost, just be really intentional and much more frequent than you are about clarifying and promoting your organization's mission to team members. If you haven't done it for a long time, it's going to feel a little awkward at first. Push past that. Don't worry about it being disingenuous. Make real, authentic connections to performances, accomplishments, revenue, Jim, right? Profit, things that actually are aligned with that, and normalize that mission and purpose around this. Is just like engagement. This is the organized way that we've all agreed on how we're going to do work. I think the second to pay attention to is really helping employees, either asking them where they feel that their daily work connects most strongly and powerfully to the organization's mission and purpose. And sometimes they might miss that. You may have to help in your role as a team leader or as a coach, really help them see where there might be some contributions they're making that really do matter and that they might be missing or minimizing in their own approach. And then the third is, don't miss the mark. I love how question 8 and question 4, recognition in the past 7 days and mission and purpose can really tie together. So we talk about sharing those stories of those mission moments. There is a lot of opportunity, and it's an incredible strategy to propel a mission and purpose forward when we just simply have people share, hey, what was your best mission moment of the past 6 months? What's the best story where you felt you created that mission impact in the past week? And I think we're all surprised at the critical mass of mission that we can create around that if we just create the space for those opportunities to be shared. So I just encourage everybody to think about coaching and directly or working through a team leader, right, as you position them for that.
Mike, we have a few resources, especially some professional resources that folks can take advantage of. What would those be available?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we are big fans of and continue to really encourage everybody. Think about our Engagement Champions course. It's a 2-day course, gets you inside the living, breathing application of engagement and all the ways really that these conversations are representative of. You really immerse yourself in engagement, the science, the research, but you come back up in a way that causes you to be a consultant and a coach around how does a team leader, how does an organization really activate these elements, particularly through the power of coaching, through team discussions, through action planning that's really well established, through goal setting that's really well established, through accountability that's really well established. And how do you understand that lens of engagement in a way that you can broaden it for others to have a look inside and see exactly how they involve themselves to drive it forward. The other course, Jim, that we're really excited about and is as we as coaches get ourselves deep inside the mind of the manager is our Leading High Performing Teams course. Takes us through a foundational level of understanding ourselves as leaders, understanding how we lead teams through the lens of strengths, but then bringing that into performance through engagement, understanding the 12 elements and how do we drive those onto performance that's brought directly into the day-to-day, weekly, monthly, and annual conversations around our 5 conversations that are brought to life through our re-engineering performance management research that's come about. So leading high-performing teams, building on strengths through engagement on into performance through those 5 conversations, a great way to get inside the mind of the manager and what you can do to coach and lead them through success. And then if schedules don't align, if opportunity doesn't align for you to take advantage of either of those 2 courses, we have an engagement starter pack that's got some great resources inside that. It's got the First Break All the Rules book that we discussed quite a bit already, but there's creating an engaged workplace manager packet that has resources that you can familiarize yourself with as you coach those managers, supply those to your managers, along with engagement generating discussion cards and other question cards that really cause that team leader to think about themselves as a coach, ways that they can lead their team members into engaging and productivity-oriented conversations that they may not have at their disposal otherwise.
All right, Mike, great job. You always increase my engagements here at Gallup every time we're together. So thank you for your leadership on this. We're on the downhill slide, a few more of these to go. And we're looking forward to the last as we do 9, 10, 11, and 12. Pretty exciting things coming up. And I think some more dynamic conversations. We've been getting a lot of positive feedback from you on these on this series. And so we always appreciate that. If you want to send us that feedback, you can send us an email, coaching@gallup.com. That engagement starter pack, that should be like a coach's minimum pack.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to think about coaching around engagement and you want to kind of dabble in this to get up to speed before you come to some training, that engagement starter pack is almost a minimum to get lots of great stuff and give it a try, both with a manager and maybe yourself in those folks that you're coaching. Remind everyone to take full advantage of all the resources we have available at the Gallup Strengths Center, just gallupstrengthscenter.com. Send us your questions or comments. Like I said, you can send those to us in an email, coaching@gallup.com. You can also catch the recorded audio and video of this program, as well as all the past ones. We call those podcasts available for you, coaching.gallup.com. If you would like to take the conversation to our Facebook page, we'd enjoy that as well. If you haven't joined us over there yet, facebook.com/groups facebook.com/called2coach, just all one word. We'll get you in there as well. Just ask for permission to let you in, and I'll let you in and lickety split. Nobody says that anymore, but I do apparently. We thank you for coming out today. With that, we'll say goodbye, everybody.